It's a people, it's a community, it's a life, it's a heart, it's a spirit.
Parents of gay children say, I want my son, my gay son, to have the same opportunity to come to me and say, hey Dad, I'm getting married, as my non-gay son or my non-gay daughter.
The heck would you want a picture of a tattoo of $1,000 on your penis for?
You might just need to satisfy yourself sexually alone at that point.
Do I regret it? Not one bit. Did I think that I would actually take it the next step and do it again? You know.
And what goes into their life, how they handle it. There are 12 houses, and each one of those houses has a particular function.
Look into yourself, think about it, and just be whoever it is that speaks to you.
Hello and welcome to Talking About. Tonight I have a very special guest, Robert Bennett, author, lecturer. What else is on your resume?
Social worker.
Social worker.
Former criminal justice person. Quite a bit.
Okay, so it's quite a journey that's brought you to me today.
It's been an interesting, circuitous journey, yes.
Okay, and sort of all beginning with a life-changing event? Or before that?
Somewhat before that, but the writing became after my accident.
Okay, and what, can you kind of go into detail about that?
Well, the accident happened July 25th, 1988 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay.
Amazing how you remember those things. Bright sunny day. I was driving down the Bell Parkway, center lane. Guy in the left lane stopped short. Guy in back of him swerved into my lane, lost control of his truck, hit me. I spun around a couple of times. Same guy hit me again. I bounced off the guardrail twice and ended up facing oncoming traffic.
Okay.
It was fun.
Yeah, straight out of Six Flags, I'm sure.
It was an interesting ride. Scariest 15 seconds I've ever been in.
Probably the longest also?
Yeah. Then the guy who had actually hit me, the guy who had caused the accident was long gone. He probably didn't even realize he caused an accident. The guy who hit me came over to me, told me everything was okay, that he was an off-duty EMT driver, and that he was going to call for help. I immediately looked at him and said that this was not my fault. Of course, I used a couple of expletives. But a few minutes later, I found myself being dragged out the driver's window and put on a backboard and into a neck brace that was too small, and dragged to Jamaica Hospital, where they did an X-ray, decided that I was fine, and sent me home.
Okay.
Which was a bad idea for somebody who was born with spina bifida.
Okay, was that something that they were aware of?
The hospital was, the drivers were not.
Okay.
And I had said something to the hospital when I got there, but they didn't seem to care.
Okay, and exactly what is the condition?
I was born with spina bifida, which absolutely meant nothing before the car accident.
Right.
I had a limp because my spina bifida is very low down in my spine. But when I had the car accident, it triggered something called an arachnoid cyst and a tethered cord. Tethered cord is where the spinal cord is connected to the vertebrae by way of scar tissue. And that probably happened as a function of the spina bifida, but never meant anything to me. When the car accident happened, the way they explained it is I probably jerked my head, and that started my whole spinal cord to die, which nobody knew about for about a year after that. Okay. I was going to doctors and so forth, and I even had people telling me that I was faking to try to get attention. Meanwhile, I was in pain, and I was losing all kinds of function.
Right.
Went through 2 different surgeries, one for the arachnoid cyst and one for the tethered cord. Ended up, by the time it was 1991, I couldn't use my legs at all, and ended up in this beast.
Okay. That's, I would definitely call that life-changing.
Yeah. So I started writing mostly about what it was like for me as a newly disabled wheelchair user, and started to write about the fact that I was being treated differently because I was a wheelchair user, and the fact that it was 1991, a year after the ADA was signed, and it was not, people were not used to wheelchairs, and society hadn't caught up yet.
Okay, and what sort of barriers were you facing at that time?
Everything from attitudinal to structural. Curb cuts were not really in vogue yet. Seating in movie theaters was not good.
Okay.
Restaurants, I constantly was getting, you know how if you sit in a restaurant and the waiters and the waitresses are scurrying all around you?
Right.
Well, every time I went into a restaurant, I would find a waiter or a waitress would bump into the back of my chair, no matter how much room was behind my chair for them to walk around.
Okay, just because they see your shoulder line and they don't realize that
Right.
something is a few inches further back.
Exactly. So that was a major annoyance. And things like that. And I was writing, one of the things that I wrote about was I took Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's Stages of Death and Dying. She's got 5 stages of death people go through as they are ending their life. And I translated that into what happens to somebody when they become disabled.
Okay, and
I went through each of the 5 stages, and I discussed how that translated into what somebody with a new disability would feel like and go through.
Okay.
And the anger part of it was something I certainly felt, and I certainly
Right,
felt.
I mean, I can imagine.
Oh, I was furious for years, and I think the first 2 years that I was, after I got into a wheelchair, I was drinking heavily, and didn't like myself very much. And then
Was that sort of a coping mechanism, or
Yeah.
was it just? I mean, it wasn't to numb physical pain; it was to numb mental pain.
it was probably at that point it was a bit of both.
Okay.
But it was certainly mostly to numb mental pain. I really didn't like being in a chair. I can't say that I enjoy it these days, but I liked it a lot less then.
Okay.
And even with my prevailing attitude that I don't really care what other people think, which has been the attitude I've had most of my life, at that point it was more difficult to carry that attitude forward.
Okay. Is it because you find yourself, or you found yourself more in need, or harder to ask for assistance?
Well, I'm not a person that asks for help ever, and whenever I ask for help, people know that I actually need it right then. And I don't like asking for help. So being put in a position where I actually needed help more often than usual was very hard for me and made me not happy.
Right. And I can imagine it's just at that point in time, it would be a struggle to regain the independence that you were familiar with prior to the accident.
Well, it was hard to regain that independence. It was also, how much of that do I want? I mean, I needed to drive. I live on Long Island. You really do need a car on Long Island. But I was sitting in a wheelchair. Do I pull my wheelchair in and out of the car just to go a mile to go to the post office? Or what do I do? And it took me a while to get my head wrapped around the idea that I just do what I have to do.
Right.
The first chair that I had was a collapsible chair, which this one is not. And it was really not a very comfortable thing to sit in.
Okay.
It was easier to get in and out of my car, but it was not a comfortable thing for me to sit in, and I didn't like sitting in it, obviously. And people would comment on a whole bunch of different things. The comment that I got most of was people asked me, do I drive? I don't understand how that is the first question out of people's mouths, but it is. And I respond, I live on Long Island, I have to drive.
Okay.
But people would ask the most ridiculous type of questions as well. You know, can I do this? Can I do that? Now, being somebody who is very, very independent, and then having to think about, can I do this and can I do this ever again, is caused me to be very embarrassed.
Okay. Because, I mean, yeah, but you're also dealing with other people's natural human curiosity, which might not be intended as insensitivity, but it comes off as such.
Right. What I found interesting, and I still do to some degree, is children would come up to me and they would talk to me, but when a parent would see that a child was coming up to me, they would pull the child away. In other words, their estimation is that it's rude to ask questions, which it isn't.
Mm. So it's sort of in the way that in the phrasing or in what's behind the question that could be inappropriate, or?
No, just asking the question itself is, to most adults, inappropriate.
Okay.
I don't understand that, because how else does one learn, especially if one is a child?
Right.
You know, children learn by asking questions.
Exactly. Well, I mean, so do adults.
Right, but adults are more fearful of asking questions, and they're more politically correct. Never liked politically correct people.
I was going to say, is that good or bad? So I guess in your view, it's not the best thing in the world to be.
No. In fact, when I became a writer, and I mostly write articles about disability issues, and it was problematic for some editors because I am not a politically correct individual. So I would write things in a manner that's not exactly politically correct, and it would cause them to have to edit like crazy.
But it would be in a manner that's matter of fact.
Yes.
So
I did an article once, and this is a great example. I did an article once for Dance Magazine, and I was writing about wheelchair ballet.
Okay.
And the editor of the magazine got upset with me because I would use the terms disabled and able-bodied. She wanted me to use the terms disabled and non-disabled.
Okay.
I have no idea why.
It's a mental
it's
barrier
bizarre.
on her part.
Yeah, but it was bizarre. And I've come across those kind of things on occasion, speaking to different people, dealing with different articles. I've come across editors that have told me, well, I'm a martial artist. I'll give you another example. I'm a martial artist. I have a brown belt in Kempo.
Okay.
And I wanted to write some articles about wheelchairs and martial arts, or disability in general in martial arts. And I've come across several editors who tell me that none of their audience is disabled. Now, if you figure there are 56 million people with various kinds of disabilities in this country, someplace in everybody's audience is going to have a disability.
Right. It's just, it's fact.
It's fact, but try to convince different editors of that is difficult.
If I don't see it, it doesn't exist.
Exactly. You know, if you were to look on the street and look in Manhattan, walk around Manhattan, you'll see very, very few people in wheelchairs. That would make some people think that there are very few people in wheelchairs around. That's not true. It's just that, number one, the city is not the most accessible place. And number two, attitudinally, we're still in a lot of the dark ages.
Okay. Is the accessibility issue slowly changing?
Slowly, but I find that New York is probably one of the least accessible places I've ever been to.
Really?
Yeah. And I mean, I've been to Europe, I've been to different states, different cities. New York is really ridiculous. 1 out of 5 streets have a curb cut in the middle of the city. The curb cuts are not in very good repair. I came across something several years ago. Often you will find a curb cut that is at least an inch or two above the pavement.
Okay.
And somebody once told me the reason they do that is on purpose. They do that to allow for room for new pavement to be laid,
right,
year after year after year.
Instead of stripping it down, they just put a new layer on top.
Right, which makes sense, except that it leaves a gap between the curb cut and the street for however many years it's going to take for the two to even out.
Right, and the way the city works is not very often.
Right, exactly. I don't remember when my street in my neighborhood was repaved, for one thing.
Okay, and yeah, if you do, I mean, I think the last time, I've lived in the same area for my entire life, and I only remember the streets being redone once as a child in that area.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing in my neighborhood. And so to catch up, to balance the curb cut with the street, will take decades.
Right.
It's nonsensical to me.
So, well, it probably provided you with material to write.
Oh yeah, a lot of comedy, a lot of stuff.
So, I mean, with the writing, I mean, what are some additional issues that you've covered?
Well, as I said, I write about disability issues, but that means everything from sports to politics. And I've covered gubernatorial races. I write a lot about sports, everything from wheelchair tennis to martial arts to skiing. I first skied after I got into a wheelchair.
Okay.
Which was interesting.
It sounds it. I mean, what's involved in that?
Basically, you sit in a bucket that is connected to a piston that's connected to a single ski. It's called a monoski.
Okay.
And the way you balance yourself and steer the beast is you have ski poles that have mini skis on the bottom of them, called outriggers.
Okay.
And so you're balancing yourself and basically turning in the direction that you want to go, and the skis turn that way. It's really a fascinating thing.
It does sound, it's different and interesting and exciting.
It was a lot of fun, actually. I only skied once because at the moment my shoulder is bothering me, so I'm not going to be able to ski this winter, and different things have bothered me over the years. So I've only been able to go once, which is a shame because I really enjoyed it. But so I've written about that. I wrote about wheelchair tennis. Trying to get into one of these tennis wheelchairs was a very interesting experience.
How so?
Because my chair has 4 wheels. Most tennis chairs only have 3.
Okay.
So that you sit in this thing and you fall backwards more often than anything else because it's not balanced very well.
Right. Is that for maneuverability?
It's for maneuverability. But for somebody who is not familiar or somebody who's just getting into the game, very, very hard.
Okay.
And then to try to maneuver the chair, stay balanced, and hit the ball at the same time, it's comical. It really is.
But once you get the hang of it, I'm sure.
Once you get the hang of it, it looks like a lot of fun. I was just told the other day that the USTA is slowly integrated wheelchair tennis with regular tennis into the U.S. Open.
Okay. So there'll be some tournaments eventually?
Yes. So rather than being what the guy called a sideshow, which is what it is now, or an exhibition, there'll be actual tournaments, which is great. Because there is actually a wheelchair tennis tournament, but it's a separate thing from
the USTA?
From the U.S. Open.
Okay.
Two different organizations. They're somewhat connected, but not really.
So slowly there's becoming more inclusiveness.
Yes.
So within the athleticism and athletic organizations, what about in the general everyday world?
This slow progress, there has been certainly progress since the advent of the ADA and now. I think it's rather slow. The other problem is the ADA was pretty much written purely for mobility impaired people.
Okay.
And even that is greatly watered down. So there's always a problem with, well, if you're blind or if you have a hearing impairment or something else, you can find bits and pieces in the ADA that cover it, but not much.
Okay. And if somebody is encountering some barriers that they don't know how to break down, who can they reach out to?
Well, the Justice Department is supposed to have the purview over enforcement of the ADA. Unfortunately, the bill was not written with a whole lot of teeth. And there were a bunch of advocacy groups that help as well.
Okay.
And for the most part, I think they do a pretty good job. There's every once in a while, there's a court case that goes as far up as the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, a lot of those cases have further weakened the law rather than strengthening it.
Okay. That seems to be the case in general with a lot of different things, not just with this.
Quite so, yeah.
Yeah, the wrong politician says, "Oh, yeah, this is good, but we can't have this," and
Yeah.
or someone's greasing the palm a little bit.
Exactly.
Just gotta love politics.
No.
But I guess it gives you more fodder to write about.
It does. The other thing I really like to write about is technology.
Okay.
And I write quite a bit about different devices that are there to help people with disabilities to have a better life. My book is actually based upon a piece of technology that I wrote about 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay, and the book is called?
The book is called Blind Traveler Down a Dark River.
Okay, and it's a fiction?
It's fiction. It's a mystery novel.
Okay.
The title of the book is an interesting thing. The title is a translation of the main character's name. The main character. I found the character's name in one of these naming books.
Okay.
And I found that the translation from Arabic is Traveler Down a Dark River. And I made the character blind.
Okay, so the character's name is?
Douglas Abeldan.
Okay.
And the character is blind, so therefore Blind Traveler Down a Dark River. And it's a mystery novel, and it is about a blind man who is using a GPS device, global positioning satellite device, to navigate through his world. And it's a real-life device that's currently being tested at the University of Santa Barbara in California.
Okay.
And so I wrote an article about this device, and then with the help of my brother, I came up with the idea, well, what would happen if the device wasn't picking up what's immediately around the user, but it was actually picking up something that's happening a distance away.
Okay.
And of course, that would cause the guy to have a lot of confusion and not know what's going on.
I read about a quarter of the book. It got to me a little bit late in the game to research it fully. But yeah, I saw that part, and it's just fascinating how it's just breaking from the fiction aspect, becoming so dependent on a piece of technology that when there's a little glitch in the system, it can cause things to go a little haywire.
Right. In fact, I don't know if in reading the book, I don't know if you've met Eddie, Eddie is an interesting character. He's a hot dog vendor.
Yes.
He's about 80 years old, and he really hates technology. So he and Douglas, he's Douglas's best friend, and he and Douglas often have this argument about, is technology good, is it bad, where are we going with it? Douglas, of course, loves technology and can't live without it. Hates the idea that he would ever have to use a regular cane or even a dog to get around. It would limit him.
Right.
So basically what happens in the book is that the device has a glitch in it. And so instead of seeing what's immediately around him, he, quote unquote, sees something a few miles away. And what happens to be going on a few miles away is a drive-by murder, drive-by shooting.
Okay.
He doesn't understand what that immediately. It takes a radio announcement a couple of days later for him to understand what
to start putting the pieces together.
Right. And in the interim, he's had a lot of nightmares about this experience. And so when it finally comes together, he goes to the police and he says, well, hey, I witnessed this. And the police, of course, say, hey you're blind. You're blind. You couldn't have seen this. He says, no, I didn't see it. I'm blind. I witnessed it. He said, where were you? I was a couple of miles away. What do you mean a couple miles away? So, you know, the long and the short of it is he ends up having to solve it on his own.
Okay. So, and, yeah, it's. I think I told you off camera. You know, I'm getting into it, and
Right.
I.
Which is why I don't want to give you too much of it.
Right. So, and, well, you don't want to give it away for the viewer because we want them
Right.
to find it at their local library also.
Exactly.
So, and the title of the book, again,
Is Blind Traveler Down a Dark River by Robert Bennett.
and there's a link on the talkingabout.info website, so people can check out our website and find that out a little bit more. In the book, you paint a little bit more of a bleak future for us, or at least the parts that I've read seem a little more just I guess geologically the world is.
Geologically the world is a mess.
Yes.
I wrote the book at a time when it seemed like the Earth was going through hiccups or changes or whatever. There seemed to be an awful lot of earthquakes happening all around the world. So I decided the future is going to be a place where the Earth has shifted in its poles, and earthquakes happen every day.
Okay.
Everywhere. And so that's the world I've set this book up in. And it's making things interesting.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, what made you jump from fact to fiction in your writing?
Basically, the idea that I wanted to see what would happen with this piece of technology.
Okay. So and it just kind of took off on its own?
Yes.
And the creative process just led you through the entire story, or how did everything come into place?
Pretty much it did. I wrote the story over a period of 2 years, in the midst of doing some other things, of course. And it really flowed very well. I'm having a lot of trouble with the second book because it's not flowing as well.
Okay, but it'll come, I'm sure. I mean,
it will.
This is really holding my interest, and if I wasn't so overworked outside of this studio, I would have been through it a lot faster. The title of the book again, Blind Traveler Down a Dark River.
Yes.
At your local library, and we're just about out of time.
Terrific.
So I have a link to your website on the talkingabout.info website. I hope you visit it, and I want to thank you again for
Thank you very
being
much
with
for having
today.
me on the show.
Thank you, and I will see you next time.